We thought it was time. We had a talk about your future, Taylor, my father announced, loudly across the Christmas table, his voice cutting through the comfortable hum of conversation, like a knife through warm butter. I looked up from my untouched plate of honey glazed ham and roasted potatoes, already sensing what was coming. Outside the floor to ceiling windows of our Upper East Side penthouse, a thick blanket of snow was settling over New York City. But inside, the air had suddenly turned much colder. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family during the holidays? I would love to know who is part of our community. The entire family had gathered in the grand dining room, a space that always felt more like a museum than a home. My younger sister, Olivia, sat to my left, her designer dress shimmering under the crystal chandelier. Her husband, Bradley, was beside her, swirling a glass of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everyone stopped mid-bite to watch, forks hovering in the air like they were witnessing some carefully staged performance. I sat there, 29 years old, and apparently still a problem to be solved. I watched the fire crackling in the marble fireplace, its warmth feeling like a cruel joke, compared to the icy silence now filling the room. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, contributing my time, my labor, and my quiet compliance, while receiving nothing but dismissive glances in return. My father, Frank, adjusted his silk tie, his face set in that rigid, boardroom expression he used when he was about to terminate a contract. My mother, Stephanie, leaned forward with a tight smile plastered on her face, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. She looked perfectly polished, every hair in place, a living testament to the Upper East Side aesthetic of effortless perfection. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight. I didn't reach for my water glass. I didn't fidget. I had learned a long time ago that in this family, any sign of emotion was viewed as a tactical weakness. I was waiting for the audit. I was waiting for them to tell me exactly how my life had failed to meet their expected return on investment. Frank cleared his throat again, the sound echoing against the high ceilings. He didn't look at me with affection. He looked at me like an underperforming asset that needed to be purged from the ledger. The holiday music playing softly in the background suddenly felt like an intrusion, a mockery of the cold reality that was about to be delivered across a table set with heirloom silver and fine china. I realized then that our relationship had never been built on love. It had been a subscription service, and I had finally reached the end of the trial period. I looked at my parents, then at my sister, who was already reaching for her phone, a predator sensing a kill. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. It was a liquidation. Stephanie reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope. She didn't hand it to me. She slid it across the mahogany surface, like she was pushing a toxic asset off her books. It stopped right in front of my plate, resting between the sterling silver fork and the crystal water glass. I stared at it, my pulse steady, my mind already calculating the depreciation of our relationship. "We have been talking, Taylor," my mother said, her voice smooth and devoid of any maternal warmth. "We think you need a fresh start. Somewhere far from New York, where you can finally figure things out without being a constant reminder of, well, of your struggles." I didn't reach for the envelope. I didn't have to. I knew the contents before I even saw them. It was a mercy check, a $20,000 payoff to disappear from their pristine social circle. Beside her, my sister Olivia shifted in her seat, her phone already angled toward me. I saw the faint red glow of a live stream. She was broadcasting this to her 100,000 followers, narrating my exile as if it were a public service announcement for her brand. She wanted to capture the moment the failed art appraiser finally got the boot. She wanted to see me break, to see a single tear ruin my makeup, so she could post it with the caption about family tough love. Bradley, her husband, let out a soft, mocking chuckle. "Honestly, Taylor, $20,000 is more than generous. Most people don't get a severance package from their own family. You have been mooching off Frank's reputation for years, while your little career stayed stuck in the basement. Montana is nice this time of year, plenty of space to be quiet." I looked at the envelope, then at my father. Frank was nodding, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture of finality. "This is for the best," he added. "You have been a weight around our necks for too long. Your little art thing has gone nowhere, and quite frankly, it is becoming an embarrassment at the club." I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Sadness was an expense I could no longer afford to carry. Instead, I felt a sharp, clinical clarity. I reached out and took the envelope, sliding the $20,000 check and the one-way ticket to Montana into my bag without a word. My reaction, or lack of it, threw Olivia off. She lowered her phone slightly, her brow furrowing in disappointment, because I wasn't providing the dramatic breakdown her audience craved. What they didn't know was that my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and the account was now closed. They saw a woman being sent into exile with $20,000. They didn't know that 3 hours before I sat down at this table, I had signed the final closing documents on a private acquisition. My secret collection of Renaissance sketches, the ones they had called junk and told me to throw away years ago, had just sold for $15 million. I looked at my mother's tight smile and my father's dismissive gaze. I didn't tell them that the $15 million was already being wired to an account they couldn't touch. I just smirked, took a slow sip of my wine, and realized this wasn't my ending. It was their audit, and they were about to find out they were completely bankrupt. I sat there amidst the shimmering gold and forced smiles, but my mind was in a damp basement in Connecticut 5 years ago. To Frank and Stephanie, my grandfather was just a source of inheritance, and his massive collection of old manuscripts was a nuisance that didn't fit their modern aesthetic. They saw clutter where I saw history. They saw junk where I saw a masterpiece. I was the only one with the patience to sift through the layers of dust, while Olivia was out being groomed for social prominence. They tasked me with clearing it all out, a job they considered beneath them, but perfectly suited for the daughter who didn't quite measure up. I remember the smell of old parchment and the biting cold of that storage unit. It was there, buried in a trunk labeled for disposal, that I found a weathered leather portfolio. Inside were sketches, red chalk on aged paper, delicate lines that captured the human form with a precision that made my breath hitch. I recognized the hand immediately. These weren't reproductions, they were original studies from the late 15th century. When I brought them upstairs, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Just have the movers take it all to the dump, Taylor," he had said. "We don't have room for more of your grandfather's hoarding." I realized then that I was living in a house where the price of everything was known, but the value of nothing was understood. My parents were so blinded by their own arrogance that they couldn't see the fortune sitting right in front of them. I didn't argue. I didn't try to educate them. I simply presented them with the disposal and transfer of personal property form. I listed the portfolio as miscellaneous paper and discarded items of no commercial value. They signed it with a flourish, laughing about how I was doing them a favor by taking out the trash. That moment was the first link I broke in the survivor's invisible chain. For years, I had occupied a space in this family that felt like a prison, without bars. I had been the silent observer, the one who absorbed their insults and handled their unwanted tasks. I stayed quiet because I was building a foundation they couldn't see. I wasn't being passive, I was being strategic. I was the silent partner in a firm they didn't even know existed. My silence wasn't a sign of submission. It was a tactical advantage. Every time Olivia mocked my lack of a flashy career, I thought about that portfolio sitting in a climate-controlled vault. Every time Stephanie compared my plain wardrobe to Olivia's designer labels, I calculated the future interest on my secret assets. I was forged in that silence, hardened by their neglect, until I became something they could no longer break. I looked at the $20,000 check on the table and felt a surge of clinical amusement. They thought they were being generous. They thought this was my rock bottom. In reality, I had been the one footing the bill for their delusions for a long time. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a closing statement. And I was the only one who knew that the Hayes family was officially in default. By the time my flight touched down in Bozeman, Montana, Olivia had already uploaded the video. She titled it "Trash Removal on Christmas Eve," complete with a crying, laughing emoji. I watched it while waiting for my luggage. the blue light of my phone reflecting the cold, clinical detachment in my eyes. In the video, I looked small, silent, and defeated. Her followers were already flooding the comments with praise for our parents' tough love, calling them saints for giving a failure like me $20,000 to start over. It was a masterpiece of manufactured reality. In Olivia's world, image was the only currency that mattered, and she had just spent my reputation to buy a few thousand more likes. She didn't care about the truth. She cared about the narrative. To my family, I wasn't a person. I was a prop in the background of their perfect life, a shadow meant to make the golden child shine brighter. As I stepped out of the terminal, the mountain air hit my lungs like a physical wake-up call. It was sharp, honest, and completely devoid of the suffocating perfume of the Upper East Side. My phone buzzed with a message from Frank. "Don't bother reaching out until you have actually accomplished something," he wrote. "You have been a burden on this family for 29 years. Don't come back until your life debt is paid." I stared at the screen. And for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of his rejection. Instead, I analyzed it like a bad contract. This was a trap of normalized cruelty. In a family like mine, the black sheep isn't the one who fails. It's the one who refuses to pretend that the golden child is perfect. My parents needed me to be the disappointment. They needed a scapegoat to carry the weight of their own insecurities and the cracks in their gilded facade. By making my professional life a joke and my career a failure, they could feel superior. It was a psychological ecosystem they had cultivated for decades. They hadn't just ignored my success, they had systematically erased it to protect their own egos. To them, my $15 million didn't exist because it didn't fit their script. They were so committed to the version of me they had created, the worthless burden, that they were blind to the sharks circling their own sinking ship. I didn't reply to Frank's text. I didn't defend myself to Olivia. I just blocked their numbers and walked toward the car I had arranged to meet me. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was analytical. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a forensic review of a failed partnership. And as the snow began to fall over the vast Montana plains, I realized that the Hayes family was about to learn a very expensive lesson in the difference between looking successful and actually being it. The Hayes family believed they had sent me to a barren wilderness. They didn't realize I was moving into a glass and cedar fortress, perched on the edge of the mountains, a space where the only noise was the wind through the pines and the soft chime of my laptop receiving wire transfer confirmations. My new home in Montana wasn't a cabin. It was a statement. It was a $15 million sanctuary, bought with the very art they had discarded as trash. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the snow bury the tracks of the car that had dropped me off, feeling a profound sense of tactical positioning. Grace, my attorney, sat across from me in the great room. The firelight glinted off her glasses as she opened a folder that looked like an autopsy report for Frank Hayes' finances. She was the exact opposite of the lawyers my father hired. She didn't care about social standing or country club reputations. She cared about leverage and the absolute finality of a well-executed contract. "Taylor, we could sue them for a decade of unpaid appraisal fees," Grace said, her voice as crisp as the mountain air. "With your credentials and the record of the work you did for the Hayes Family Trust, we would win. But it would be slow. It would be a messy, emotional battle in the public eye." I looked at the glowing embers in the hearth and shook my head. I wasn't interested in a slow burn, and I certainly wasn't interested in being a victim in a courtroom. Anger wasn't the goal, ownership was. I didn't want a settlement, I wanted the deed. "Frank Hayes is a master of the gilded facade," I told her, my voice cold and methodical. "But facades are expensive to maintain. For years, I watched him mortgage the Upper East Side penthouse to fund Olivia's modeling career and Stephanie's gala tables. He is leveraged to the hilt, Grace. He has been using the penthouse as an automated teller machine for his own vanity." I slid a tablet across the table to her. It contained the details of the $15 million currently sitting in my investment account. "I don't want you to file a lawsuit," I said. "I don't want the property, Grace. I want the paper." Frank has been using that penthouse as a personal ATM, racking up secondary mortgages and high-interest lines of credit. With his fraud scandal breaking, the banks are desperate to offload his distressed debt. I want you to buy those notes at a steep discount. I won't be their daughter. I will be the creditor who holds their keys, every cent. Grace paused, a predatory smile slowly spreading across her face. You want to become his creditor? She clarified. No, I corrected her. I want to become his landlord. I've been the silent investor in their version of family for 29 years, footing the bill for their cruelty. Now it is time for a full-scale repossession. I want them to realize their life was built on high-interest vanity, and I am the one calling in the debt. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. By the time the snow melted, the Hayes family wouldn't just be losing a daughter. They would be losing the ground beneath their feet. And I would be the one holding the eviction notice, calm, factual, and lethal. The clock on my wall ticked with the precision of a metronome as Grace pulled a digital file from the depths of her investigation. It was 2 a.m. Outside, the Montana wind was howling, a stark contrast to the absolute stillness inside my office. Grace looked up, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of her screen, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just professional, it was predatory. Taylor, she said, her voice dropping into that low, dangerous register. I found the silver bullet. I moved to stand behind her, my eyes scanning the rows of scanned documents from 10 years ago. It was an insurance claim, filed by Frank Hayes. According to the document, a pipe had burst in the basement of the Connecticut house, flooding the entire storage unit where my grandfather's collection was kept. Frank had stated, under penalty of perjury, that the entire portfolio, the same one I had just sold for $15 million, had been destroyed beyond salvage by water damage. He had provided faked photos of ruined paper to substantiate the loss. The insurance company had written him a check for $50,000. $50,000. It was a rounding error in the grand scheme of his wealth back then, but to Frank, it had been free money, a little extra capital to fund another summer in the Hamptons or another designer bag for Stephanie. He had dismissed the collection as worthless to my face, but behind my back, he had turned it into a small-time criminal profit. I realized then that our relationship had never been built on love. It had been a subscription, with me footing the bill, but the cancellation was going to be much more violent than he anticipated. Because I had sold that worthless collection through one of the most prestigious auction houses in the world, the provenance was now public record. The sketches were cataloged, authenticated, and insured for $15 million. The moment the sale was finalized and reported, it triggered a massive red flag in the industry's central database. Frank hadn't just been ungrateful, he had been a felon. The insurance company's fraud department doesn't have a sense of family loyalty. They don't care about his reputation at the club or Olivia's social media followers. They only care about the $50,000 he stole a decade ago, adjusted for 10 years of interest, and the statutory penalties of felony insurance fraud. I didn't feel a single pang of regret as I watched Grace prepare the final report for the authorities. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was methodical. My father had spent 29 years telling me I was a burden. And yet, here he was, about to lose his freedom because he was too arrogant to realize that the daughter he discarded was the only one who actually knew the value of what he had stolen. They weren't shocked by what they'd done. They were shocked that I'd stopped playing along. Frank had tried to buy my disappearance for $20,000, never realizing that he had already signed his own confession for $50,000. The irony was a balance sheet that finally made perfect sense. Calm, factual, lethal. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. The Montana mountains were unforgiving in late March, a jagged landscape of white and gray that matched the absolute stillness of my home. I was sitting in my glass-walled study, watching the horizon, when a lone black car struggled up the winding drive. It stalled twice before coming to a complete stop 50 feet from my door. A woman stepped out, wrapped in a fur coat that looked ridiculous against the biting wind. She was shivering, her expensive boots sinking into the drifts. As she got closer, I realized it was my mother. But this wasn't the Stephanie Hayes who had presided over the Upper East Side penthouse with a tight, condescending smile. Her hair was windswept and graying at the roots, and her flawless facade had been replaced by a raw, naked desperation. I opened the door, just enough to let the cold in. She didn't wait for an invitation. She practically collapsed into the foyer, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with the smell of wet wool and panic. Taylor, please, she sobbed, her voice cracking like the ice on the lake. You have to stop this. Frank is facing 5 years in federal prison for that insurance filing. The insurance company won't negotiate, and the banks, they've triggered the acceleration clauses because of the felony fraud investigation. The entire debt is due now. They are foreclosing in 14 days, and since I bought the secondary liens, I've blocked any chance of a bailout. We have nowhere to go. Bradley has already filed for divorce to distance himself from the scandal, and Olivia is being sued by her own sponsors for breach of morality clauses. I watched her with a detached precision, the way I would evaluate a forged antique. I didn't offer her a chair. The account of my patients had reached a zero balance years ago, and now I was simply closing the ledger for good. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a liquidation of bad debt. Why are you here, Stephanie? I asked, my voice as flat as a ledger sheet. I am not the district attorney, and I am not the insurance company. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, avoiding the contact. You are the one who triggered the audit, she shrieked. You sold those sketches. You told the world we were liars. If you just sign an affidavit saying the water damage happened later, if you just give us the money to pay back the bank. I picked up a folder from the console table. I didn't just sell the sketches, I said, handing her a thick stack of legal documents. I realized your version of love was a subscription I couldn't afford, so I decided to become the service provider. While Frank was busy trying to forge my signature for a few $1,000s, I was working with my attorney to acquire his liabilities. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted the deed. Your father mortgaged that penthouse 3 times to fund Olivia's vanity and your galas. He defaulted on the secondary line of credit when the asset freeze hit. I bought that debt, Stephanie, every $250,000 of it. I didn't do it to help you. I did it because I wanted to be the one to sign the final notice. I looked her directly in the eyes, my expression clinical and decisive. You are not facing a bank anymore. You are facing your landlord. And the eviction notice in that folder? I already signed it. Goodbye, Mom. I opened the door, letting the Montana wind sweep through the foyer. I watched her stumble back out into the snow, clutching the evidence of her own displacement. I didn't feel loud anger. I felt the satisfaction of a balanced account. They weren't shocked by what they'd done. They were only shocked that I'd finally stopped playing along. The legal proceedings moved with the cold, mechanical efficiency of clockwork gears, and 3 months after that final confrontation in the foyer, the Hayes family legacy was officially liquidated. The penthouse, the heirlooms, the social standing, all of it had been an elaborate fiction, sustained by bad debt and forged signatures. Watching their world dissolve wasn't like watching a tragedy. It was like watching an audit reach its inevitable conclusion. The assets didn't fit the liabilities, and the Hayes family was simply a business that had gone under. If this story reminded you of your own worth, please share it with one person who needs to hear it today. What would you have done if you were in Taylor's shoes? Let's talk about it in the comments. I used the remaining capital from the $15 million to establish the Heirloom Foundation right here in the heart of Montana. I didn't build a monument to my own name. I built a sanctuary for the young artists and researchers that the world and families like mine usually overlook. My grandfather's real legacy wasn't the price tag on a few sketches. It was the belief that value is grown through attention and care, not inherited through blood or status. This was the justice of the sower. For 29 years, I had been treated like the soil, something meant to be walked on, something used to support others while remaining invisible. But the sower knows that the soil is where the power truly lies. While Frank and Stephanie were busy polishing the gilded surface of their lives, I was busy planting seeds in the dark. Now, their garden has withered because it had no roots, while mine is just beginning to bloom. Frank is currently serving his sentence for insurance fraud, a man who once valued his reputation above all else, now reduced to a number on a federal registry. Stephanie and Olivia are living in a two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they once mocked, discovering for the first time what it means to live without a subscription to high society. They aren't just broke, they are socially bankrupt. The very followers Olivia cultivated have turned into her harshest critics, a digital jury that offers no mercy for the cruel. I rub my eyes, but I don't look for regret anymore. There's only a profound, silent clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was the final entry in a very long ledger. I used to think that being uninvited to that Christmas dinner was the lowest point of my life, the ultimate rejection from the people who were supposed to love me. But standing here on my porch, looking out over the vast Montana plains where the sun is painting the sky in colors no New York gallery could ever capture, I realized the truth. Being uninvited was the greatest gift they ever gave me. It was the one-way ticket to my own existence. They thought they were ridding themselves of a burden, but they were actually releasing a force they never bothered to understand. I am no longer a shadow, a disappointment, or an asset to be managed. I am Taylor, and for the first time in my life, I have finally, truly, and completely found my way home.